Welcome everyone to another episode of Word Fuel, and it's a very special day for me, I would say. If you remember last episode, we had brother Bill on it, Bill Medeiros, who's a Christian author, and he's writes Christian books. Well, me and Bill were just talking about creation, talking about evolution, and he brought up someone who I didn't know of, Jim Perloff, and just some of his work and some of the ways that he's been so insightful for Bill. And so I was like, man, I would love to have him come on the podcast if he could actually do it. And Bill said, I think he would do it. I was like, all right, well, you make it happen, Bill. And here we are right now. With us today, we have Jim Perloff with us. And well, so we have both. We have Bill and Jim. So Bill, first I want to thank both of you guys for being here today.
Thank you.
And Bill, you want to introduce Jim for us?
Sure. So as a fledgling author of children's books, and I do mean fledgling, I'm well pleased to introduce a well-established author to our Word Fuel audience, Mr. James Perloff. Jim is a good friend and no stranger to Open Door Baptist Church in Belmont. He's a professional journalist since 1986, was a contributor to the New American Magazine for 27 years, author of 8 books, has primarily written on history and geopolitics from a Christian perspective, and also on spiritual issues. Has written 2 books about creation versus evolution, Tornado in a Junkyard, and The Case Against Darwin. He is a Boston University graduate with a bachelor's in nursing and worked as a medical professional in the state of Massachusetts. He regularly blogs at his website at jamesperloff.net. And today we're focusing on the topic of these 2 books at a summary level: Tornado in a Junkyard, The Relentless Myth on Darwinism, and then, which I think is a great primer, The Case Against Darwin, Why the Evidence Should Be Examined. And personally, as a young Christian, and as a young Christian in my 40s, because of people like Jim, I've learned how to reason with the positions of evolution, only later to learn how my youngest child stood up to her 6th grade teacher, challenging him on the concept of humans being descendants from animals. So James Perloff has had a profound influence for the better on my family. Welcome, Jim. It's good to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. So I think we have a couple questions for you, but we're going to save those towards the end.
Sure.
And just would love to have you kind of just talk to us about yourself and, maybe coming to Christ, and then also just about just the relevance of this topic that we're going to be talking today, evolution versus creation.
Right. Well, I became a Christian in 1983, but one thing that was bugging me was that we've been taught a very contrary viewpoint in school. And, when I was a child, maybe 9, 10 years old, one of my mother's friends bought me a subscription to National Geographic, and they used to have these pictures of guys like Louis Leakey in Africa, and he'd be digging up these bones. He called us Australopithecines. He would say, this is our ancestor from a couple million years ago, And so science is supposed to be, reliable. So this is bugging me as a Christian, like, well, is the Bible correct here, or are these Louis Leakey types correct? So I decided to start exploring. I think WEZ was a Christian station back then, and I think they had a guy come on once, talk a little about creation science. I got interested in that, and I picked up a book by Dr. Gary Parker and Dr. Henry Morris called What is Creation Science? And that just kind of blew me away. I said, wow, Darwin's theory is really a house of cards,
Right.
So
right.
I really started exploring this, and I found that there were some excellent authors like Dr. Lee Spetner and Dr. Michael Behe, who'd written fantastic refutations of Darwin's theory, but their work was pretty technical, and I felt I wanted to do something just for the average Joe, something on a lay level, would take their work and kind of break it down very simply. So that resulted in my writing Tornado in a Junkyard in 1999. But the reason I wrote a second book, The Case Against Darwin, was somebody um, uh, called me up and or sent me an email and said that he wanted to buy 40 copies of Tornado in a Junkyard to give to school board members. And I thought, well, no school board member is going to read a 300-page book, you know. So
Right.
I just needed something really small. And then eventually, in the early 2000s, you know, I saw people giving PowerPoints, which were quite effective. I said, I got to latch onto this technology. So I started to give a lot of PowerPoints to youth groups and church groups and conservative groups on this and other topics. But that's kind of how things came about. And you mentioned, again, you, Bill, both seen my most recent PowerPoint, which I posted on the internet,
Yes.
on the Rumble channel, and maybe put a link there. I will certainly when I post this interview on my website and social media. But that kind of is a end result of many years of working on these things and seeing what appeals to people most and what works the
Yeah.
best and what hits
Yeah.
people the hardest. Try to make it very simple.
Right. I thank you. I was gonna ask you, could I post that PowerPoint because I loved
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Oh,
and
sure. Absolutely. Please.
okay, yeah, and I want my kids to I want to sit down with my kids and watch it with them because it's so deep and understandable. And I just think it's something that will be very beneficial for members of our church and just for those who follow us who actually watch this podcast or this blog. So thank you for that. And yeah, Bill, take it away, brother.
Oh, this is Jim.
Oh, that's
Okay.
right. So I said we're gonna. Yes, sir. My
What
sorry about that. I messed
yeah,
this up.
sure. What I thought we talk about first is why is this relevant?
Yes, why
And
is this relevant?
because that's important to know, because some people think, well, creation evolution, they were just talking about biology, that's it's a science, who cares, you know? But
Yeah.
it's far more than that. Darwin's theory had an enormous impact on the world and especially on religious faith. And so I want to just point this out, you know, a lot of Christian parents find that when they send kids to public school or to college, they come back and they start growing into atheists, you know. And so why is that? It's because when you are in church or you read the Bible, you read that God created all things in the book of Genesis, created the world, the universe, all life forms. But when you go to public school, now you hear that life came about without access to God. It just there was a purely naturalistic event that created the universe, the Big Bang, and all life forms were created because at one time there was this primordial soup, they call it, on Earth, and the right chemicals got together randomly and formed the first living cells, and all life proceeded therefrom. And
Mm,
so, you know, a child will start to think, well, who's telling the truth here, my pastor or my science teacher? And a lot of them opt for the science teacher, thinking that, you know, he's been, you know, more formally educated and he must know more. And it's a quote from Julian Huxley, that of my work. He was a leading evolutionist of the 20th century. He said Darwinism removed the whole idea of God as the creator of organisms from the sphere of rational discussion.
mm.
So, end quote. So he's saying that if you believe in God instead of Darwin's theory, you're not even a rational
Not even a
person.
rational person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, perfect example of someone's being turned to an atheist by evolutionists myself. You know, I attended Lexington public schools in Massachusetts. In sixth grade, 1963, my teacher, Mr. Horowitz, was teaching evolution. I had a little Christian classmate. She raised her hand and said, well, Mr. Horowitz, that's not what the Bible teaches. And he put her down. He said, I'm sorry, dear, but science has proven the Bible is wrong. And my
Mm,
classmate said, yeah, science proving the Bible's wrong. So what did I do? I didn't know it, but this is I was not raised in a Christian home, by the way. We didn't, you know, particularly have opinions one way or the other on the subject. But this is the first step towards me becoming an atheist in my youth, when I was taught that the Bible was nothing but an old myth. So that was very significant. But I'm not the only one. You know, this is not at all a unique experience. I would say that probably millions of people have had this experience. And some examples I give, there was a Boy Scout. It was a very controversial situation a few years ago. His name was Daryl Lambert. He, you know, he joined the Boy Scouts. When the Boy Scouts, you're supposed to say, "I believe in God," or at least at that time. I don't know about now, but he wouldn't do it, and so he made headlines. And is the correct quote. He said, "I'm an atheist. I believe in evolution." Okay, this is the process. Now, let me quote someone more famous. This is E.O. Wilson, evolutionary biologist at Harvard. He said, quote, "As were many persons from Alabama, I was a born-again Christian. When I was 15, I entered the Southern Baptist Church with great fervor and interest in the fundamentalist religion. I left at 17 when I went to the University of Alabama and heard about evolutionary theory." You're going to hear this unquote, time and time again.
Right.
Andrew Carnegie, steel magnate. Some said he was the richest man in America in his time. He wrote an autobiography in 1920, and here's what he wrote. Quote, "When I, along with 3 or 4 of my boon companions, was in the state of doubt about theology, including the supernatural, and indeed the whole scheme of salvation, I came fortunately upon Darwin's and Spencer's work." Herbert Spencer was the guy who coined the phrase survival of the fittest. "I remember that light came as in a flood, and all was clear. Not only got rid of theology and the supernatural, I found the truth of evolution." End quote. Another example. I'll give you another one. This is a very important guy. Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union, killed millions of people, but yet most people don't know that he started out as a Christian theology student. So I'm going to quote from his official biography published in the Soviet Union, Moscow in 1940. It's called Landmarks in the Life of Stalin. By the way, there's only one copy of this book in New England. It's Harvard's Widener Library. So I had to go there
Wow.
to find the book, make sure I had the quote right. Here's the book says, quote, "At a very early age, while still pupil in the ecclesiastical school, Comrade Stalin developed a critical mind and revolutionary sentiments. He began to read Darwin and became an atheist. G. Glorgidze, a boyhood friend of Stalin's, relates, I began to speak of God. Joseph heard me out, and after a moment's silence said, 'You know, they're fooliness. There is no God.' I was astonished at these words. I'd never heard anything like it before. 'How can you say such things, so-so?' I exclaimed. 'I will lend you a book to read. It will show that the world and all living things are quite different from what you imagine. And all this talk about God is sheer nonsense,' Joseph said. 'What book is that?' I inquired. 'Darwin. You must read it.' Joseph impressed on me. A guy who went on from being a theology student, Christian, to killing millions of people. Now, this has gone on for a long time, and I want to give one more quote. And this is from Charles Darwin himself, because it really tells you about his motives. Now, he mentions a man named Lyell here, and he's talking about Charles Lyell, who's an evolutionary geologist and certainly one of his best friends, perhaps his best friend, Charles Darwin. So Darwin said this, quote, "Lyell is most firmly convinced that he's shaken the faith in the deluge," meaning the biblical flood, "far more efficiently by never having said a word against the Bible than if he'd act otherwise. I have read lately Morley's Life of Voltaire, and he insists strongly that direct attacks on Christianity, even when written with the wonderful force and vigor of Voltaire, produced little permanent effect. Real good only seems to follow the slow and silent side attacks." End quote, Charles Darwin, 1873. So here's Darwin himself characterizing his work as a slow and silent side attack. See, Darwin lived in Victorian England, and at that time, you couldn't attack the Bible or Christianity. People would come after you if you did that.
Yeah.
But people were gaining respect for science. You know, science had given the light bulb, the telegraph and the telephone. So the public respected science. So Darwin got the idea. I'm not going to say anything against the Bible. I'm just going to say that science says this is how life came about. We evolved from, science shows we evolved from lower life forms. I'll let people decide all on their own that the Bible's not true. I'm not going to say it. I'll let them make up their own minds about it. And that's what a lot of us did, because that's what we're taught in public school. So that's the relevance of Darwinism. But I know how an evolution would respond to what I just said, because I used to be an evolutionist. They would say, well, fast, fine. So Darwinism had some social impact, big deal. The fact of the matter is, Darwin's theory is as well proven as the laws of gravity, and you can't get around that. So that's why after I present the relevance of Darwinism, I then turn to the evidences against Darwinism. Now, my 38-minute video on the Rebel channel, I go over about 9 evidences against the theory of evolution, but I thought we'd talk about 3 today, because our time will be limited.
Yeah, absolutely.
3 main points I wanted to touch on, but I'll let me throw it back to you guys first.
I was just thinking about just your story when, that student, when you were in class and that student that stood up and said to the teacher, "No, this isn't true," and the teacher rebutted back. And
that was my Sarah. That was Sarah. And she was the pipsqueak of the class. She was like, it was like David versus Goliath. She was just a little thing.
Well, I'm thinking about
his daughter, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Jim. Yeah. I'm thinking about Jim's situation when, the The teacher responds that no, evolution is true, and then the class kind of just cancels the kid.
Right.
I think that's obviously that's still happening today. I would say times 10 to so many students. I have a lot of Christian friends whose kids are in public school. My kids are in public school. Haven't had anyone really push against them. They so at the school that my kids attend right now. Just so happens that the teacher was teaching both positions, but typically that's not the norm. Absolutely, I talk to
Right.
a lot of Christian parents, and they're just like, they're just basically teaching this as truth, and then so you have the teacher, and then you also have the classmates who are canceling
And you get the
as
fear,
well.
you get the fear of getting a failing grade.
Yeah, and I love on your PowerPoint where you said that the kid now has to make a decision: do I listen to my pastor who's only been to seminary, and then, or do I listen to my teacher? And then everyone's like, yeah, this teacher's a scientist. And we're in math, we're right here by Harvard. And of course, so it's like, science is God here. So this is very relevant. It's a very, very relevant conversation that we're having, because I think a lot of Christians, and what you're about to get into is the evidence, a lot of Christians, they can't explain it as well in a conversation or remember certain things. And so I think you do really well of teaching just a common person common Christian, how to respond to those who teach evolution as truth. So I'm really excited about these points you're about to go into.
Yeah, the evidence is amazing. And what I want to do first is just recap what it is that the theory of evolution says, because some people in the
Yes.
audience might not remember. So the theory of evolution says that life began in the ancient ocean in a primordial soup when the right chemicals formed the first living cell. And eventually these chance created cells began to reproduce. They became multicellular creatures. And then these multicellular creatures became the first invertebrates in the ocean, creatures like a jellyfish. Then the invertebrates developed backbones and became fish. And the fish yearned to come ashore. So they developed little legs. And they came on shore and they became the first amphibians, which are creatures that could go on land or water like a frog. Then the amphibians evolved into reptiles. Reptiles evolved into mammals. Mammals evolved into ape-like creatures, and the ape-like creatures evolved into man. And that's the theory of evolution in a nutshell. So let's proceed to take it apart. And I think the place to begin is at the beginning, the origin of life.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that chemicals assembled themselves into the first living cell by chance. No God involved. So the first thing I want to point out is that has anyone ever actually observed, science is based on observations, has anyone actually observed chemicals make themselves into a living cell? No, there's zero observations that support this concept. The second thing is, Charles Darwin thought that cells were simple. He said they're small, therefore they're simple. And he said that on the Origin of Species, his book, he said that all you would need would be some phosphorus, and he named 7 other elements, and he said these things could assemble themselves to a cell. He didn't know about the genetic code. Okay, it wasn't until much later that Watson and Crick won Nobel Prizes for discovering the structure of DNA. And this Nobel Prize winner, I'm sorry, scientist Crick, he pointed out the impossibility of evolution. A cell, a single cell, even a bacterial cell, has thousands of different proteins. That's what the essential component of a cell is. Now, a cell, in turn, is structured on a smaller building block called amino acids. Sounds a little technical, but it's true. Now, there are hundreds of amino acids in one protein, and they have to be in the correct order for the protein to exist and function. So Crick estimated the odds of getting one protein by chance, and he estimated the odds as 1 in 10 to the power of 260, which would be a 1 with 260 zeros after it. Professional mathematicians say that the odds of getting of anything worse than 1 to the power of 10 to the 50 should be considered impossible. So it would be impossible to get one protein by chance, let alone the thousands of proteins that a living cell would require. So it's mathematically impossible. But there's one other point I'd like to make about this. Darwinists say that these first living cells were created by chance and they started to reproduce. But hold on, cells usually have a short lifespan. A single cell, a single bacterial cell usually doesn't live very long. But for evolution to be true, even if a cell was created by chance, life has to reproduce. Bacteria have to reproduce to create other bacteria, the next bacterium. Our body cells reproduce themselves. Animals, plants, birds, they all reproduce. That's how life continues. So to believe in evolution, you have to believe that this first cell created by chance, before it died, in the span of one lifetime, must have created, developed, and perfected the process of cellular reproduction, because if it didn't, there never would have been a second cell. And that's totally illogical. So if we look at the Darwinian explanation for the origin of life, we see that it has zero observations to support it. It's mathematically totally impossible, and it's illogical. But
Yeah,
in
yeah,
school, they just teach you it's a settled science. Experts say that's the way it happened, and they
right.
don't present both sides of the argument. If you're a juror in a courtroom and you just heard the prosecution side, you probably think that the accused was guilty. But you only heard
Mm,
the defensive side, you think the guy was innocent. You got to hear both sides of the story, but that's not what we're taught in public schools normally. You
right.
mentioned your kids are an exception,
That's not the
but
norm. Yeah,
yeah. According to Scientific American, 67% of public school biology teachers teach evolution as settled science.
right.
All right. You guys jump in anytime you want to with a
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
ask.
absolutely.
But a second um, area of disproof has to do with transitional forms. Now, again, evolution says we went from a bacterium to invertebrate to fish to
Hmm.
amphibians to reptiles to mammals, ape-like creatures to man. So, um, what evidence do we have for these transitional forms? To go from one to another would require many intermediate steps. For example, let's say
Hmm.
that a fish was to become a land creature, he'd have to evolve new bones. He'd have to have evolved new muscles to support those bones. He'd have to evolve new nerves to move those limbs. And also,
Hmm.
fish breathe totally differently than we do. So while he's coming ashore, you have to evolve a totally new breathing system. So as you can imagine, there would be a tremendous number of intermediate forms between the fish and
Yes.
the amphibian. In fact, Charles Darwin himself said this on the origin of species, quote, the number of intermediate and transition links between all living and extinct species must have been inconceivably great. Assuredly, if this theory be true, such have lived upon the earth, and quote Charles Darwin. What's the most obvious place to look for a transitional form? Well, it's right in the living world around us. If you look at the living world,
Hmm.
we see bacteria, invertebrates, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, apes, and men. How many species do we see that are intermediate? There's tens of thousands that fit into these categories, but how many species are there that are intermediate between them? Zero,
Right.
none whatsoever. So again, we have a situation where the evolutionist proposes a theory with zero observations to support it. Now, an evolution would say, well, it's back in the fossil record, which we could get into. But the point I'm making is,
Mm,
there should be someplace on Earth where there'd be some remote island, isn't there, where reptiles would still be evolving into mammals, but there aren't. There's not
right.
a single transitional form in the world. And so the evolutionists explained it by saying they all became extinct. Well, that's just a convenient excuse for not having any evidence whatsoever. It's like saying my dog ate my homework. You know, they don't have no proof, so they come up with this idea. Well, they all became extinct. They were here before, but now they're gone. Okay, so this is another area,
I
and I
think you
also want to
said,
point out, yeah,
oh, sorry. I think one of the quotes I remember that you brought up was, I think it's Alan H. Linton, who
yeah,
says 150 years of science of bacteria with no evidence of one species of bacteria changing into another. I
yeah. Oh, this is the
never thought
great
about
irony.
that.
Yeah. The evolutionists say that bacteria, what single-celled organisms, evolved into human beings, but by actual observation, according to Dr. Linton, who is professor emeritus of bacteriology at the University of Bristol in the UK,
Hmm.
um, in the 150 years of studying bacteria, we've never seen one species of bacteria change to another species of bacteria, let alone evolve all the way into man. Okay,
Wow.
so
Yeah.
again, but to demonstrate the impossibility of this, they say that reptiles evolved into mammals, right? Well, reptiles give birth by laying eggs, and mammals give birth through the birth canal. So how can you be halfway between those two? Can you half lay an egg? Can you half give birth through the birth canal? You're talking about something that's technically not feasible. So no
Right.
observation, technically impossible, just like with the origin of life. So that's,
Okay.
second major piece of evidence.
Mm. No, that's good. That's good. Thank you.
Um, I can move on to a third one.
Yeah, yeah, please keep
Okay.
going.
All right. So the next one is genetics. And, it's not as complicated as it might sound. Our physical characteristics are dictated by our genes.
Hmm.
So a zebra can't give birth to a giraffe. Why? It's only got zebra genes. A person can't be born with blonde hair unless they've got blonde hair. A woman can't, otherwise she's
Hmm.
got to use Miss Clairol. So when Darwin was developing his theory, he thought that animals just had to change their anatomy and they would adapt to whatever their surroundings was. So Darwin said this. Speaking of evolution, he said, by this process long continued, it seems almost certain that an ordinary hoofed quadruped, meaning a four-footed creature, might be converted into a giraffe. End quote, Charles Darwin. So he thought you could take something like donkeys, put them in the African jungle, and then, over time they'll evolve into giraffes. The problem with that, though, it's not just the anatomy that needs to change, it's the genes. After a million years, donkeys will still be donkeys because all they've got is donkey genes. Put them in the jungle is not going to make them into giraffes. Okay, so uh, genetics was still a very young science when I'm sorry, I think there's some leaf blowers outside, but genetics was a very young science when Darwin was around, and he didn't know about it. And when genetics first came on the scene, then the Darwinists were against it because they couldn't figure out how a fish whose gene pool is radically different from that of humans could possibly get the genes to become a human. You would need the genes, not just changes in your anatomy. So they thought about long hard and finally come up with a solution. The solution they came up with was mutations. Now, if you go to the dentist, if he takes an X-ray, he'll throw a lead apron over you. That's because excessive radiation could cause mutations in your body. In other words, a mutation is a change in genetic information, and that's what they were looking for, something to explain the fact that the fish's genes had changed to the genes of an amphibian and then a reptile and that of finally of a human being.
Hmm.
But the problem is that uh, mutations always cause losses of information. And I'm going to quote Dr. Lee Spetner in 1997. He wrote a book um, called Not by Chance Shadowing the Modern Theory of Evolution. Now, he taught
Hmm.
information theory for 10 years at the Weizmann Institute in Johns Hopkins.
Hmm.
And here's what he writes, quote, in all the reading I've done in life sciences literature, I've never found a mutation that added information. All point mutations, that's the most basic kind of mutations there is in the genetic code. All point mutations studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce genetic information and not increase it.
Right.
End quote, Lee Spetner. Now, if you take a look at it, what do mutations cause? They cause birth defects. They cause sickle
Hmm.
cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, hemophilia, and thousands of other genetic diseases. They don't build you up. They
Never
don't
to
add
never
function.
never to enhance.
Right. They never
Right.
enhance you.
Right.
They never add a new
Yeah.
function. They take away function. They don't
Yeah.
add it to you. And this is interesting. You'll see this in my PowerPoint. Richard Dawkins is considered the leading evolutionist in the world today. And he was asked in an interview, Mr. Dawkins, can you give us an example of a mutation that has added information to the genome? Well, Dawkins sat there for a while in silence, kind of looking around, and finally said, turn the camera off. And
I
then
saw that.
when they finally resumed the interview, he changed the subject. See, the leading evolution of the world couldn't name one example of a mutation that's added information to a species, to a living creature.
Mm.
He couldn't name one. And that confirms what Dr. Spetner said, namely that there are no such mutations, that they always reduce genetic information. Um, So what is a mutation? Is it like a typographical error in a book or a newspaper?
Mm.
It's an error in the copying mistake in the genetic code. Now, is it possible that a typographical error in a book could improve the book? It's conceivable, but actually we really never see that happen.
Right.
And neither is a error in the genetic code going to improve a living organism. So again, now this is three times now we look and we see zero observations that support the idea that cells could assemble themselves into a living creature, zero
Hmm.
observations of transitional forms, and zero observations of mutations that actually increase information. Um, so we're talking about theory that is a house of cards. It's got
Yeah.
nothing to support it. It does not have
I
information, observations to support it. And any good theory
mhm.
should be endowed with a lot of
Right.
observations
I I
in order.
almost I almost died laughing when you gave the example of a Honda Civic manual turning
Oh
into
yeah,
evolving into the book Gone with the Wind.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
basically what you're saying if you believe this theory.
Right. I'm sorry about all the noise, by the way. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're
Yeah, I
fine.
can hear you. Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Jim,
Okay.
I got
So
one,
it's
one,
leaf
one.
blowers. I was hoping they wouldn't come now and they came now anyway. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So we could go into other areas, but let's see how long we're going for over
Jim,
30 minutes now. Maybe we
No, we're
could
good.
turn it over to some questions. If you go to my video on Rumble, I give about 9 proofs. I've given you three
Yeah,
so far. I give about
right.
9 proofs against the theory of
Yeah.
evolution.
Yeah, I have
But
them all here. Yeah.
Jim,
Good.
Jim,
yeah,
I,
so
can
Can
you
you
hear
hear
me, Jim?
Bill?
Can you hear me?
sure, absolutely, yeah.
So I got back to your point on the genetic codes and the would you agree that one of the ways that evolutionists try to back into their back their argument into justification is you hear the argument, well, primates have similar features as Homo sapiens,
Yes.
bipeds, quadrupeds, eye structure, hands to a similar degree, but that's irrelevant because it's just a sign that back to the Honda Civic, it's just evidence that whoever's
Hmm.
behind the creation of those primates or of those quadrupeds, that the muscle structure, the heart structure, there were features that were common because they
Hmm.
allowed to make that particular kind of creature function. In other words, we see airplanes, trains, automobiles. They have combustible engines, they
Mhm.
have wheels, and they move, right? They roll.
Yeah.
But just because they have combustible engines and wheels, and that doesn't make
Well, I think Bill's, I mean, not Bill, I think Jim said it the best when he said we share common traits with
that they're
animals,
common traits,
but it doesn't
but
prove
they
common
but because of
ancestry.
the genetic coding, they're very unique,
Yeah.
and they didn't
Well,
come from the same and they didn't come from the same source, as we would
right.
say.
Except for God. Let me just explain how Darwin came up with this idea. If you go to um, church and you see a family sitting there, notice that the kids look, brothers and sisters kind of resemble each other and they resemble their parents, and that's because they get their genes from their parents. And so Darwin noticed that. But what he did was he stretched the conclusion. He'd look, in fact, let me just say, quote Darwin on this. Let's see. Okay, here's again Darwin, Origin of the Species. Quote, what can be more curious that the hand of a man formed for grasping and that of a mole for digging, the leg of a horse, the paddle of a porpoise, and the wing of a bat should all be constructed on the same pattern and include similar bones in the same relative positions? Is it not powerfully suggestive of true relationship of inheritance from a common ancestor? So what Don would do, as you were kind of already saying, Bill, Don would look at a man and a tiger and say, well, the tiger's got teeth and the man's got teeth. The tiger's got a brain, the man's got a brain. The tiger's got 2 ears, the man's got 2 ears. They both got 4 limbs. So it proves they had common parents back on the evolutionary tree. But the problem is that's just an assumption. Now, to take another example, we were talking about the Honda Civic. Let's take a Honda Civic, compare it to a Mercedes. They both have 4 wheels. They both have transmissions, they both have headlights, they both have windshield wipers, hundreds of components in common, yet every single one resulted from intelligent design, car designers. It wasn't that one car evolved into another. So why do cars have four wheels? It's because car designers find that two wheels, three wheels doesn't work very well, but four wheels work best. It's an intelligent design. It's the same thing with animals. Why do all animals have four limbs? It's because God knew that was the best design to use. And it has nothing to do with man and tigers having a common ancestor back there, a common source in God, but not a common biological ancestor. So this, again, is an assumption which is rather easily disproven by analogy.
Right, exactly. And that was the point that I was hoping you would make. Pastor, do we want to close out with our questions? I know, Jim, we could be here forever because this is excellent material that everyone needs to be aware of so they can think rationally against these points.
Yeah.
But in closing, you want to
let's do some questions.
So
you go first.
Okay. So Jim, I have this morning I decided to go into Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI companion, which is designed to help us think, create, and get things done more effectively. And I asked the following: is creation true? And the short answer I got was creationism is a religious belief, not a scientific theory. The scientific consensus overwhelmingly supports evolution as the explanation for diversity of life, while creationism is rooted in the faith tradition rather than empirical science evidence. So they're already crisscrossing the wires. And then they went on, they had some bullets on what is creationism, the scientific perspective. Interesting, a lot of their bullets were taken from Wikipedia. And then why the debate persists. And one of the issues was education controversies. Disputes arise whether creationism should be taught alongside evolution in schools, which has been our argument all along. Let the student decide where the evidence falls, right? But the bottom line that it stated was creationism is true within the framework of faith for believers, but is not considered scientifically true. Science relies on evidence and testability, and by those standards, evolution is accepted explanation for life's diversity.
So I want to make a comment about that testability.
Go ahead.
First of all, AI is very good if you want some synonyms for a word, or if you want some tips on how to fix your toilet. But if you ask about politics, history, COVID vaccines, or anything else of controversy, it's always going to go with a mainstream narrative. And same thing as you just pointed out with evolution. So AI is handy, but it is programmed to support the official view of things. And so when it says that it's based on empirical science, I just want to make a very strong point here. I've heard evolutionists often say that evolution is like physics and chemistry. It's a science. If you challenge it, it means you're anti-science. They say that evolution is well proven as the laws of gravity. Well, I've already seen here it's not, but I just want to compare it to physics and chemistry. So physics, the law of gravity, right? You can demonstrate that 100 times, 1,000 times, any number of times you want. And how about in chemistry? There's a law that water would boil at 100 degrees centigrade. Now, you can test that over and over again, always proves true. It's repeatable, it's testable, it's observable. And suppose I had a theory that water will boil at 73 degrees Fahrenheit, centigrade, excuse me. It's easy to disprove that. You just turn up the water to 73 degrees centigrade, it won't boil. So, but let's compare that to the claims of Darwinism. Charles Darwin said that the reason that humans have so little body hair is because our ape ancestors preferred mates with less hair. Now, how do you test that? He's talking about something that happened like 1 million years ago. You can't go back in time to observe. It's not observable. It's not testable. It's not repeatable. You can't prove it and you can't disprove it. It's just a subjective opinion of Charles Darwin. That is not like the laws of physics and chemistry. So don't let anybody confuse you on that subject. This is an opinion. It's not a law of science. So when they try to put it in the same category of physics and chemistry, that is totally wrong. It is totally apart from the reality.
I agree with you, Jim. And I think what was lacking back then was, unfortunately, they didn't have a tool called evolution mingle, where you could then prefer what your mate would have been back a million years ago. But based upon what we just saw, as you heard, the
Yeah.
AI defense of evolution over creationism, which is nothing more than a regurgitation of the unreliable positions you reveal in your materials, right? Within the growing immersion of AI in the public square of learning and at the workstation or in the classroom, what is a parent or grandparent to do as a watchman in the arena of contending for truth? What would you?
Well, I think this is a case where it's not enough to say you believe in God. I think you need to be able to counter the arguments of Darwinism, which is and be acquainted with them. And that's why I tried to put it on a very simple level. The
Yeah.
the lack of observations for transitional forms, for the start of life, for mutations changing the fish genes into humans, and just on a very basic level, show that evolution is scientifically wrong. It's that science part that kind of gets people. They think, oh, they must have used scientific method. They didn't. Darwin himself, as I pointed out, admitted that his theory was a silent side attack on the Bible. That's what he designed it to be. He wanted to destroy people's faith. It was not about advancing science at all. And so, yeah, science does fantastic things, no question about it, if it's a good science. But Darwinism happens to be very bad science. It's really not science at all. And I think if people just acquaint themselves, again, my video summarizes about 9 basic proofs, and it's only 38 minutes long. And that's after, my books that I showed you, the case against Darwin, that came out in 2002, and Tornado in a Junkyard. I used to go on Christian radio a lot, the old shows. That was the Tornado Junkyard was 1999. So I've been at this for a long time. So that video is kind of a summary of the most basic points, the strongest proofs against the theory of evolution. And I think if people just acquaint themselves with that, they'll be able to counter the arguments that their children hear in school. That to me is the best way to go about it. Present a plethora of evidence that shows that really Darwin's theory is whacked out. It is really off the charts. It is not true at all, and the evidence against it is totally lacking. It's true that creatures can be modified over time. Okay, you can take a fast female horse and a fast male horse and breed them, and their offspring might be very fast. And you might get a breed of fast horses that way, but they're not going to run 1,000 miles an hour or turn into elephants. Okay, that is, there's a limit to how much change. There is change over time, but it's a limited change, and one species does not transform into a totally different kind of creature. The fish is not going to adapt into a human being. God is a smart designer. He knew that his creatures would have to adapt to different conditions. So in my video, I've got a picture of some Norwegian forest cats, and they've got very long fur because God knew his creatures would have to adapt to hot or cold conditions. So he gave them the ability to transform to longer fur if they needed longer fur in a cold climate. And like when we get an infection, our body is smart. It adapts to that by producing more white blood cells, and our temperature goes up because bacteria have a harder time living in a high temperature. But we don't transform into a different type of creature. This is just the smart, intelligent adaptability God gave to creatures. They adapt to their environment, but they don't adapt all the way into another totally. The cat does not adapt into a dog. That's what Darwin thought. He thought the fish will adapt to a human being. That's totally wrong. Fish will adapt to different conditions, but there's a limit. And Darwin's problem is he thought that there was no limit to that adaptation. So here again, Darwin falls short. It uses his imagination to think these things happen that never happened.
Right. Pastor, you got a question?
Yeah, I like the way you summed up your presentation where you said that when it comes to evolution, when it comes to Darwin's theory, there's no observation to support it. It's mathematically impossible and completely illogical. And I like that, the way you kind of just summed that up after all of your evidence. What I found living here in Massachusetts and going to different retreats and different things for pastor gatherings, I find a lot of pastors who, when the subject comes up, they say that it's something that doesn't really matter. It's not something to argue about. God definitely could have used it. and they don't see the issue with believing it or whatever. And I have a problem with it because, as you've shown, it's not true. I think it changes the narrative of the story of the Bible. But I was just wondering, just to hear from your
Definitely.
point, what do you think about it?
About these
Pastors
pastors.
who take that
Yeah.
position.
Well, I think that they probably aren't informed. Like say, after I became a Christian, I was troubled for a long time by the what I'd been taught about evolution in school, and I wanted to find out which one is true, and that's why I had to read
Hmm.
Gary Parker and Henry Morris's book, "What is Creation Science?" And
Hmm.
they do need to acquaint themselves with the facts. If they're not acquainted with the facts, they're not going to be able to uh, argue against these claims that are being made that this is scientifically proven. So I think that's essential, but I always try to make it as simple, as lay level as I can, not argue on a technical level. You know, I'm on a I'm on a
Hmm.
creation network. I'm a member of the Creation Research Society, but these guys argue about very technical things, you know, that the
Hmm.
average layman just can't digest. I'm not really interested in that stuff. I'm just interested in that stuff that the average Joe can understand and
Right.
talk to his kids about. That's what's important. And for the pastors, they will be able to argue it if they just acquaint themselves with the basic facts, which is what I
Yeah.
did. I don't think it's enough to say I believe in God to a person who is given up on God because he's been taught evolution. I
Right.
think you need to go into those ideas about he has about evolution, and show him why those are not supported by scientific observation and evidence.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think it is something that Christian pastors, need to make a decision about. I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, I truly believe that. I believe that it's just not one of those things where you can say, "Hey, we can have both," because it's totally two different interpretations of who God is,
Totally
and
two different interpretations.
yeah,
I know what you're
absolutely,
talking about because
yeah,
I meet Christians who say, "Oh, I believe in both." But if you believe in both, how can you believe that God created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden,
right,
and on the other hand, say that uh, you believe in evolution, which says that man evolved from fish over millions and millions of years? Those are two totally different explanations. Now, I know some people say that God used evolution over millions of years, and he just used evolution, but that is denying the power of God. God has the power to create
mm,
instantly.
right,
It's a total denial of God's power to say that
yeah,
he had to wait millions of years
yeah.
for Adam and
I
Eve
would
to come about.
I would say what you just said is what I hear the most. That is actually the argument I would probably that's most popular today, is that God used that, and I'm like, no, God didn't need to
No, no,
use
no,
evolution.
no,
So
he
no,
didn't need
thank
it.
you. No, Bill, you had one more, right?
Yeah, I do. And Jim, I think you might have answered my question already, but from your years of blogging, debating, interviews on various podcasts, when it comes to this topic, does the Christian have the individual have a responsibility in this arena? And if so, what do you see the individual Christian's responsibility when it comes to the debate between evolution and creationism? Or
Well,
should we just fall on the
I
shoulders of a pastor or a
well, you know,
teacher?
yeah, the theory of evolution was an attack on the Bible, and when your enemy attacks you, you have to defend yourself against the attack. And so, in order to really maintain your faith, it's unfortunate you have to do this. You know, in the early days of Christianity, of course, there was no theory of evolution, so people didn't have to acquaint themselves. It was enough to say, I encountered the apostle Jesus Christ, and I believe in his crucifixion, his resurrection. But now you've got a theory which is trying to push Christianity out of the way, claiming that it's science. And so it is the responsibility, I think, of a Christian, if they really want to be effective in showing their faith with those who have been persuaded by evolution, to know the facts that refute evolution, because they are simple. And like I say, I sum them up in about a half hour, and you can show evolution just has nothing behind it. It's just the only reason it gets away with it because they won't present both sides in public school for the most part. You know, they just hear the one side. They say it's settled science. Experts believe. You know, I think it's one of the most dangerous headlines we see in the media is experts believe. You know, people say, "Oh, experts believe it must be true." You know, but there are a lot of experts. You know, the Creation Research Society, Creation Research Institute. Um, and other creation organizations have hundreds, if not thousands, of members who hold PhDs. On this, like I said, the Creation email network I'm on has all kinds of PhDs on it. So it's not that all scientists believe in evolution. That's not true at all. We would be in the minority because the deep state found it useful to take away people's belief in God. I think you wanted to ask me about this before. Was does this affect people's attitude towards other people? It does. When if you think people are just animals, well, why not treat them as animals, get them into boxcars, or use them for experimentation or whatever? If you think God did not make a special creation when he made man, man is obviously not just a more evolved animal. What animal can laugh at a joke or develop computer software, or what animal puts on his clothes and goes to the church to worship God on Sunday? You don't see these things happen. Man is obviously a special creation. He's unique. He's not just another animal. But again, to counter the arguments of the evolutionist, the Christian does do well to acquaint himself. It doesn't take long with the basic facts that refute it and show what a bad piece of so-called science it is.
Right. Well, and Jim, one other thing that I know we're not going to touch upon, but you and I know, and Pastor knows, that lies behind all this when people say, well, why hasn't it disappeared? This evolutionary argument on evolution is the catchphrase, show me the money. And there is a lot of money in the industry behind people's tenures, threatening people's jobs, whether it be on universities or areas of science and research, that people feel like the student in the classroom. They're intimidated by it. But in closing,
Right.
Pastor, anybody
Yeah.
who's wants to learn, I would strongly recommend Jim's primer, the case against Darwin, why evidence should be examined. It's very straightforward, very simple to follow, and it's very powerful. And Jim, I thank you for your diligence behind your research, and just being one of the watchmen on the wall out there for the sake of biblical truth.
And Bill, I would say absolutely money, absolutely. But it's also deception. It's also evil. And we know that the whole world is under the power of the evil one. And so it's definitely
Right.
a spiritual warfare as well, this
Right.
whole topic. And so I second with Bill, Jim, I just honor men like you who work in this way for the kingdom. And I just thank you for your work. And so actually, if you could just tell us where we could find all of your resources, that would be really helpful for us.
Sure. My books, Tornado in a Junkyard and The Case Against Darwin. Tornado in a Junkyard is a monumental book in the sense that it has almost 700 footnotes. I spent 2 years in all kinds of academic libraries for my research. And The Case Against Darwin, just a little primer, as Bill was saying, for people who don't have time for a longer book. The other place to go is on my Rumble channel, which is called Book Refuge, the word book and the word refuge. And I only have a couple of videos there. Just click on the one on creation evolution, and that's a 38-minute video that it's a PowerPoint. This kind of the evidence is stronger when you have pictures supporting what you're saying. So pictures of proteins and Darwin and the critics of Darwin. It's just add interest level to the audience. That's what PowerPoint is very effective at doing. So yeah, the Rumble channel video, and I do blog at jamesperloff.net. I used to be on jamesperloff.com, but that particular hosting site was starting to kick out politically incorrect members for violating community guidelines. So I thought I better get it out of here. So I got it done their host, and I changed my website to jamesperloff.net. So I do blog there, not really so often on creation evolution. I blog on quite a few other topics that are relevant going on today. We see so much going on today. There's trouble in the world, genocide in Gaza, and the continual limitation on our freedom, whether it's the Patriot Act or the COVID lockdowns or climate change, carbon footprint restrictions. We see our liberties gradually being destroyed. And also we see the consolidation of power in the church. It's ecumenicism, and in politics, it's a world government. They say that in the Book of Revolution, the Antichrist will govern the world. Well, to govern the world, you need a world government. We're actually, I think we're getting close to the end times at this point, especially with digital ID. You know,
Absolutely.
for a lot of people, a lot of countries and states, you couldn't buy or sell. You couldn't go shopping, right, unless you showed your vaccine passport. Now that went away for a while, but it's certainly a beta test. And now digital
Mm,
ID is mandatory in China. They're trying to make a digital ID mandatory in Britain. You won't be able to keep your job without it. And you can see how this sets us up for the market. I'm not saying the digital ID is the mark of the beast, not at all. I think the beast is going to come before the mark of the beast comes, but you can see how we are progressing steadily towards world government, digital ID,
mhm,
mark of the beast. We're headed in that direction. You're getting close. I really believe that. So there's a lot
absolutely.
of topics to be covered, but evolution remains a very significant one. Again, that I think probably, I don't know, you could survey the numbers, but I'm sure that millions of people became atheists or agnostics as a result of it.
Right, right. Bill, do you have anything?
Yeah, well, Jim, after reviewing your evolution creationism PowerPoint slide, and I recommend everybody to do that.
Hmm.
I haven't seen that material in a while. I've seen it before, and we've been blessed in the past to have Jim make presentations at Open Door Baptist Church, along with Dr. Gary Parker. At
Yes.
one time, a number of years ago, came up from Florida and gave us a
Yeah, I
presentation.
introduced him that day. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, yeah.
great. Uh, now you're inspiring me to write a children's book on those points in your PowerPoint. So I might be calling
Yeah.
you and asking you to collaborate on
Well,
that.
that would be a great idea. You know, one of the more challenging things for me was, you know, I went to a Christian school and there were like elementary school kids there, and that is, you know, my points, PowerPoints were more geared towards like high school and up. You
Hmm.
know, so
Hmm.
trying to get this message across to young children is more of a challenge. But you know, I'm sure you could find a way to do that on a simple level. Of course, if they haven't been exposed to evolutionary teaching yet, they may not require that, but that is the group that is yeah, more challenging to
And they
convince, but
deserve it.
maybe they're just not at a point where they need convincing yet.
Right. And
Yeah,
they
I
deserve it.
agree.
They deserve that our attention on that as much as the teens and young adults do.
Mhm.
So,
That's it.
well,
Well, thanks,
Jim,
Jim.
Bill, thank you so much for being here today. And this has been another episode of Word Fuel, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.